Fighting for freedom, liberty, and the restoration of the Constitution. The Patrick Riggins Show. Call in now at 865-243-8255. That's 243-TALK. And now your host, Patrick Riggins.
Welcome back. This is Patrick Riggins with the Patrick Riggins Show. And we're just jumping right into the show today. We got a lot to cover. And obviously because of this week, if you weren't sleeping all week, you realized the Supreme Court ruled that Obamacare was constitutional under the mandate, under the premise that it is a tax, not a mandate. Now, I'm not going to sit here and rehash all of the debate that has been occurring this week on television, the print and internet media, even here on talk radio. But as to the argument about this being a tax, if you miss the start of this show each week and you just don't pay attention, here is part of what is played at the first of this show.
Spending is a tax. As soon as the government spends money, eventually it's a tax. Sometimes we put a direct tax onto people, sometimes we borrow the money, and sometimes we print the money.
In case you didn't get that, any and all government spending is a tax. It doesn't matter what it is used for, since the government does not make anything. It doesn't produce anything. All of the money that it spends has to come from somewhere else. So instead of talking about all this sideshow stuff going on with this bill, I'm going to direct your attention to the center ring, where I'm going to offer the reason behind why all of this is happening. And this is something you will not hear on any other radio show. That is because there is no other radio show like this one. That is why this show is growing by leaps and bounds. It isn't all due to the fact that, well, I'm extremely handsome and erudite, but really, this show is one of the few shows that tackle these questions because I'm not afraid of offending the political ruling class. I happen to believe in the American people and the fact that they will make good decisions more times than not. How else can you explain how successful America has become? Personally, I think the American people have triumphed in spite of the misguided and failed policies of politicians who think they know more than we do. But getting back to this Supreme Court ruling, why did they rule the way they did? Why did Chief Justice Roberts rewrite the law from the bench in order to make it work? I've stated it on this show before, but I'll say it again for all the new listeners who are constantly tuning in each week. The government is getting comfortable with trampling on the Constitution, which in turn is trampling on your rights and liberties. The reason it is becoming comfortable with this is because we are letting our elected representatives and their cohorts in these government agencies get away with it. Whenever a question about whether someone in government has the authority to do a certain thing, all they have to do is look around and see that other agencies are getting away with whatever they want to do, so it must be okay. And if it isn't, then the people affected are only going to be suing that agency. The government has demonstrated time and again that it will go to bat for its people, that it will take the bullet for the unconstitutional and unauthorized behavior of its employees. So what do the employees have to lose by not abiding by the rules? Nothing. And what do you have to lose by not abiding by the arbitrary and sometimes ridiculous rules the government comes up with? Well, everything. Government doesn't have to obey its rules. Heck, it doesn't even obey the Constitution. But if you try that, you'll be fined, punished, and maybe even imprisoned. The worst that government employee is going to get is maybe fired. But their boss will just pick up the phone, call his friend who runs another one of the hundreds of government agencies, and get this employee hired there. And they'll even get to keep their nice fat pension and cushy government health and benefits plan. All the while, we're trimming away another branch off the American tree of freedom and liberty. Because as the owners of that tree, we, the American people, are not paying attention to what is happening. Until one day, we are going to look out into our yard And all we're going to have left of that tree are some little scraggly branches piled up at the street, waiting for the government to haul off the last pieces of a once mighty tree of freedom and liberty. And when our grandchildren ask about it, we'll talk about how grand that tree was and how it provided shade to millions of oppressed people looking for a better life. But we allowed it to be pruned back so much that it finally died. And now it has been incinerated in the furnace of governmental control. And unfortunately, a lot of American citizens allowed it to happen because they were promised the security and safety of heat and light from the burning of that tree. But now that it has been reduced to ashes, they have nothing. Neither the shade of freedom and liberty, nor the safety and security promised them. The key is to stop government from pruning away our freedom and liberty, and to start fertilizing and watering until once again we have a strong and tall tree capable of providing protection to millions of people seeking refuge under its branches. So ask yourself why the Supreme Court ruled as it did. Because we have let them. We have told the people in Washington that we don't mind losing freedom and liberty here and there if it'll give us some type of perceived security. We must start rolling back this mindset in Washington and at all levels of government, because the more you let it get away with, the more it is going to try to do. The simple solution is stop asking your fellow citizens to pay for your life. And that is what you're doing with government-sponsored health care or governmental anything. You are telling the taxpayers of this country that you cannot afford to pay for something, so now they have to provide it for you. And don't call up telling me your sob story on how your grandmother couldn't afford her health care or your son has some disease which is bankrupting your finances. I'm sorry. Believe me, I'm truly sorry if something like that is happening to you or someone you know. But does that overrule my rights and freedoms? Does the fact that life is not fair, that things don't always work out here on earth, is that my fault? And if it isn't, then why am I having to pay for it? Now, if I donate to a campaign to raise funds for your deathly ill grandmother or your son with a disease he didn't ask for, then that's perfectly fine. And we see that type of thing happening all the time. In fact, you can read a story about that in our local paper just yesterday. People will always reach out to help those who are less fortunate. Believe me, I know. But to demand that the government take money from one citizen and give it to another in the form of direct payments of money or services, you cannot argue that is the right thing to do. It is theft, plain and simple. And by receiving those payments of other people's money, you are an accessory to theft. You are in possession of stolen property. And to try and justify it in any way just condemns your actions even more. Now, if this offends you, I invite you to listen to this clip from one of my very first shows. More times than not in life, the truth is not pretty, and it is not easy. It is usually hard, and you end up taking a stand that is frequently assaulted from both the left and the right. So you see, sometimes you may not agree with what is being said on this show, but you can trust a lot of thought from a libertarian, and I would argue a purely American point of view has gone into formulating the opinion. Incidentally, I'll mention this real quick. If you'd like to hear more of this type of thing, if this show, this little monologue part of this segment has got you thinking, you can go to our YouTube channel now, and there we're posting all of our archive shows, and you can go back and listen to those. The address for that is youtube.com and then / Patrick Riggins Show. That's all together. So if you type in youtube.com and then / and then Patrick Riggins Show with no spaces in between the words. If that's too complicated, you can just go to youtube.com and type in Patrick Riggins Show into the search box, and it'll give you the whole listing. And you can go back and listen to some of these past shows. But what you're going to hear all the time on this show is a consistency in individual responsibility. We don't fudge that for anyone. And if this last little monologue didn't convince you of that, I don't know what will.